Time to talk about chapter 2 from Alla Prima. Awesome book. So I highlighted some of my favorite parts. If you could summarize chapter 2, it would be about painting what you see rather than painting what you think is there. At the end of the chapter, one of the summaries that he puts down is indicative of a point that he makes over and over again. If you struggle with this, he really hits it home for you. He says, "The variety and styles of direct painting are endless." He uses direct painting as interchangeable with alla prima painting, or sitting down and painting from beginning to end in one sitting. Wet paint on wet paint, not waiting for anything to dry. So the variety and styles of direct painting are endless, and what I have outlined so far is only the spirit and partial substance of it. It is a very simple idea. Reduce your subjects to their essential visual shapes and paint them as accurately as you can, nothing more than that. But it gave rise to some of the most joyful painting in all of history. Always try to remember, if there is ever a conflict in your mind between what you know and what you are actually seeing, paint what you see, because if you don't, the result will look like something that isn't there. I had this experience when I was painting my niece as a ballerina and trying to do her face. It was like a very odd angle as she's being lifted up, and I was just trying to ignore that it was a face and just look at what shape the brightest light reflecting off of her face was. Paint that shape, not try to make it look like her, but just try to paint that bright shape. I was surprisingly pleased with the results. Although it didn't look like her, it still looked like a person. It looked like a ballerina. I don't know that I'm fantastic at copying shapes yet, but I have had experience with this working out for me. In the beginning of the chapter, he starts out with a lot of art history, which I find a little bit redundant, but he doesn't stay on it too long. A lot of art books go into art history and light and electromagnetic wavelengths, and I find this super redundant, and I get really bored of reading the same thing over and over again at the beginning of every art book when they delve into history. And he does do that to some extent. It's not as long as I've seen in other art books. It's a shorter summary of history, and he focuses on elements that most art books don't focus on. Something that I really liked that he did focus on was some history of Michelangelo. He and his colleague introduced a fine-tuned concept called Chiaroscuro. I think I'm saying that right. It's a use of high contrast light and shadow, not only to show form, but also to improve dramatically moving effects of light. He says, even when the use of light and shadow in painting did catch on later, it took a few more generations before shadows, with their tricky color temperature reversals, were understood well enough to be rendered with a look of naturalness. This is where he's going into the history of artists painting color into images and having certain colors assigned to images, and not necessarily did they paint what they saw, or if a shadow looked a different color, they didn't paint it a different color, they just painted it dark. He talks about how Rembrandt was awesome at painting color in the light, but he didn't do a lot of interesting painting of different colors in the shadows. That part wasn't revolutionary about his painting style. He talks a little bit about how early painters were oftentimes known for what painting subject they were good at painting. So one artist might be they specialized in painting horses. They painted horses a lot. They painted horses a certain way. No matter what the horses actually look like, they had their way of painting horses. And an artist could be identified by the way they painted the horse. So if an artist works on this mural and their horses look a certain way, then you know that specific artist did it because that's how they paint horses and that's their work, so it's obvious. They would specialize like that. Or if you had more than one artist working on the mural, like maybe one artist is doing the figures, the people, and the other one's doing the horses, and the other one's doing the landscape in the background, because that's what they're known for. As he's talking about these different styles and how everything is forming and progressing, he doesn't go into abstract art or modern art. He doesn't consider them milestones. This is who he is as an artist. He just doesn't value things that he doesn't believe are beautiful or representational. He has no patience for that. So that's just something about him. He says, I shall leave it to historians and sociologists of future generations to figure out why these things happen in art, if such is within the bounds of reason, referring to abstractionism in modern art. I thought this was really interesting. He says that before he starts a painting, he doesn't necessarily have specific steps that he follows in every single painting, like a lot of painters who used to paint the old way, where they did all the layers and they let it dry and then they do another layer and let it dry. They often had a systematic process that they would use. And he doesn't have a systematic process, but he says that what he does before he starts a painting is he tries to visualize what the end result is going to look like before he even starts painting. I don't think I've ever done that. I just see what I'm painting and I want it to look like that. I don't think of the artistic flourishes that I want to have in there, or how I want the colors to combine, or which edges I'm going to make blurry and which ones I'm going to make sharp. I don't think that deeply about it. I didn't remember reading that part the first time through, and the second time through it gives me an idea of something I might want to try before the next painting I do. The next section I'm going to read, he's referencing your knowledge of painting a subject versus just looking at it and painting what you see. He's referring to your experience and what you already know about the subject. He says your experience and learning are indispensable in tricky situations, like when the subject moves or when the light changes. So while direct painting rests upon capturing the shapes of color on your subject, your aggregate knowledge is working for you as well. Somewhere in the mysterious recesses of your mind, it is all there. You could not avoid including this knowledge in your technical decisions if you wanted to. Just remember, knowledge can never be complete. Therefore, use it as a tool, not as a rigid set of rules. Above all, listen to what nature tells you. Clearly, your experience and knowledge give you a powerful advantage in whatever you do. But in the end, things will always look the way they do, regardless of whether or not their appearance agrees with what you have learned about what they ought to look like. So that's the balance between painting what you see and painting what you know. Use what you know in tricky situations when you're not sure what you're seeing is right, but you're not sure what to put down. Paint what you see. It sounds paradoxical, but I think it makes sense in practice. Maybe. He shares a painting that he says he painted as a study under a time restriction, and he says, in reference to that image, with this and many other similar studies, I came to understand and eventually master my own procedures and sequences of paint application necessary to execute paintings such as this. Not the least of the lessons I absorbed was that this kind of painting had to be learned under the time and circumstantial pressures of working from real life, and that the knowledge gained was far beyond any rules or special methods. It was driven instead by certain ideas and logical principles. So he's learning things that he wouldn't otherwise learn if he didn't feel that time pressure, the crunch. This person is sitting there, you're painting them, and you don't have all day. He talks a little bit about brushstrokes, and I'm kind of obsessed with brushstrokes. I think a lot of artists are. He says that with alla prima or direct painting, there are no demands for elaborate, sophisticated brushwork. But if you want to show off, you can. He references some artists that have opposite brushstroke detail and accuracy. He says Zorn and Sargent were notably fussy about how they put paint on and delighted in cocky flourishes. So much so, their dexterity is often the first thing noticed. However, they did it with such consummate skill that we delight in their bravado. Painters like Serov, Henri, and Twachtmann simply didn't care about surface technique, and to me, their work is somewhat stronger for it. And that's it for chapter 2. Chapter 3 is all about getting started when you have this blank canvas. Where do you begin? What do you do first? How do you plan it out? Now we're getting into actual painting and less theory, so it's exciting. I get migraines and the medication wasn't working well enough, so the doctor gave me Botox all up around in here, back here, like everywhere. And now I can't lift my eyebrows. And then he referenced, I think I'm reading it